In the shadowy corridors of global power, few things are as closely guarded as the secrets of a superpower's military might. For years, China's defense infrastructure was shrouded in an aura of invincibility, its cutting-edge weapons marketed as the ultimate deterrent to any rival. But in the high-stakes game of South Asian geopolitics, one country dared to pull back the curtain. In a stunning display of precision and resolve, this nation dismantled the myth of China's unbeatable arsenal, revealing vulnerabilities that even Beijing had never imagined. That country? India. The spark, a massacre in Pahalgam. Just 2 weeks earlier, a terror attack in the serene meadows of Pahalgam had shaken India to its core. 5 heavily armed militants stormed a tourist spot in Kashmir's Baisaran Valley on April 22, 2025, and unleashed carnage. By the time the gunfire fell silent, 26 civilians lay dead, making it the deadliest attack on Indian soil since 2008. Heartbreakingly, the attackers singled out Hindu and other non-Muslim tourists, even forcing victims to prove their religion before shooting them. Among the victims were newlyweds, husbands executed point-blank in front of their horrified wives. A young Navy officer on honeymoon was killed protecting his wife, who would later become the poignant face of the tragedy. The outrage in India was immediate and visceral. The attack was claimed by the Resistance Front, TRF, believed to be a front for the Pakistan-based Lashkar-e-Taiba, though TRF oddly retracted its claim days later. New Delhi, however, had no doubts about the hand behind the carnage. To Indian officials, this was Pakistan-backed cross-border terrorism, a line tragically familiar in Kashmir. The Indian government responded with sweeping measures short of war. Pakistani diplomats were expelled, the Indus Waters Treaty was suspended, borders sealed, and public fury rose to a fever pitch. Islamabad, as always, denied involvement, but the familiar script of denials did nothing to stem India's resolve. Across India, candlelight vigils honored the victims, while an emboldened government in Delhi prepared a different kind of response. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his security cabinet authorized a bold plan to strike at the heart of terror infrastructure across the line of control. The operation was given a code name laden with symbolism: Sindoor, the vermilion worn by married Hindu women, a poignant homage to the widows of Pahalgam, and a message that their husbands' blood would not go unavenged. With the world watching and nuclear-armed neighbors on edge, India's military was about to execute one of its most audacious missions in decades. In the pre-dawn hours of May 7th, the operation kicked off with surgical precision. Indian Air Force Mirage 2000s, Jaguars, Su-30 MKIs, and Rafales took to the skies, armed with an array of smart munitions. Almost simultaneously, units of the Indian Army and Navy launched land attack missiles. Their targets: key terrorist training camps, ammunition depots, and safe houses belonging to groups like Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba deep inside Pakistan. India was careful to insist these were counter-terror strikes, not all-out war. No Pakistani military bases or civilian centers were deliberately targeted, only the terror infrastructure that Pakistan had long been accused of sheltering. For Indians, Operation Sindoor was a long-awaited retribution. In total, the armed forces struck nearly 20 high-value targets across the border, hitting as far as Pakistan's Punjab heartland. Within minutes, reports filtered in of successful hits on multiple terrorist hideouts. Flames and smoke could be seen billowing from sites in Meridka, the hometown of Lashkar's headquarters, Balakot, the site of India's 2019 airstrike, and new targets in Pakistan's interior where militants felt untouchable. Thanks to months of intelligence gathering and the element of surprise, the strikes were devastating. An estimated 70 to 100 militants, including several top commanders, were neutralized in under half an hour, according to initial assessments. The message was clear. Those behind the Pahalgam massacre had been hit hard and fast, but as the Indian jets turned back unscathed, the guns had only just fired their opening salvo. Islamabad was stunned and furious. Pakistan's civilian leadership condemned the strikes, calling them unprovoked aggression. The Pakistani military, embarrassed by the ease with which Indian missiles rained down, now faced intense pressure to respond. Within hours, Pakistan vowed to settle the score, and its armed forces went on high alert. South Asia braced itself for the conflict to escalate. Pakistan's response would lean heavily on the hardware supplied by its closest ally, China. In recent years, Beijing had become Pakistan's main source of advanced weapons, and now those systems were put to the test. The Pakistan Air Force scrambled its frontline Chinese-made fighters, the JF-17 Thunder Block III and the newly inducted J-10C Dragon jets. Both boast modern AESA radars and carry China's pride, the PL-15 Beyond Visual Range Air-to-Air Missile. The PL-15 is a long-range killer touted to outrange most Western missiles. On paper, these systems gave Pakistan the ability to challenge even India's best fighters. Pakistani J-10Cs and upgraded JF-17 took to the air, bristling with PL-15, determined to deter any further Indian strikes. At the same time, Pakistan activated its ground-based air defense network, again largely Chinese-supplied. The centerpiece was the HQ-9 long-range surface-to-air missile system, China's equivalent to the Russian S-300, deployed to protect critical sites. Complementing it were medium-range HQ-16/LY-80 batteries guarding cities and bases. Overhead, Pakistan had a high-tech Chinese YLC-8E radar positioned at Chunyan Air Base, about 70 kilometers south of Lahore. This powerful anti-stealth radar, billed as one of China's flagship systems, was meant to spot even high-flying or radar-evading targets. If Indian jets or missiles came again, Pakistan hoped, the YLC-8E and HQ-9 would sniff them out and shoot them down. Pakistan's counterpunch also included a barrage of drones and missiles. Along the line of control and the international border, Indian troops reported incoming armed drones buzzing overhead. Pakistan was using its arsenal of Chinese-origin Wing Lung-2 attack drones, comparable to America's Predator, to launch retaliatory strikes. These drones carried AR-1 laser-guided missiles and bombs, seeking Indian military positions in Kashmir. There were also whispers of longer-range missiles being readied, perhaps Pakistan's new guided rockets, or even a salvo of Chinese-supplied cruise missiles. But the ISPR, Pakistan's military media wing, kept details opaque. What was clear was that Pakistan's Chinese playbook for warfare was now in full swing. Chinese jets in the air, Chinese missiles on the ground, Chinese drones in the sky, all aiming to exact a price for India's audacity. In Islamabad and Beijing, confidence was high. Chinese state media had long trumpeted Pakistan's Chinese-built arsenal as a game-changer against India. Now, Chinese officials keenly watched as their weapons were put to use. Billions of dollars of hardware, from jets and drones to missiles, had been supplied to Pakistan as part of Beijing's strategic design to counter India. If these systems performed as advertised, Pakistan could bloody India's nose and dissuade any future strikes, exposing vulnerabilities in Chinese systems. What unfolded next, however, was not the heroic narrative Islamabad had envisioned. Instead, Operation Sindoor and the ensuing clashes exposed glaring weaknesses in Pakistan's Chinese-supplied weaponry, much to India's advantage and China's acute embarrassment. The first cracks appeared in Pakistan's air defenses. Despite its imposing specifications, the vaunted HQ-9 long-range SAM failed to intercept India's incoming missiles. Indian forces had fired a mix of supersonic BrahMos cruise missiles and other precision-guided munitions in the initial wave. Pakistan's HQ-9 batteries, on high alert, launched several interceptors, but none hit their mark. Some Indian missiles sped through to their targets unscathed, while others were diverted by Indian electronic warfare tactics that effectively jammed the HQ-9's radars. Later analysis suggested the HQ-9's targeting systems struggled against the BrahMos low-altitude, high-speed profile. Whatever the cause, Pakistan's top-tier SAM had underperformed when it mattered most, leaving the skies open for follow-on strikes. Chinese military observers were alarmed. On Chinese defense forums, angry commentators blamed Pakistani operators for unprofessional deployment of the HQ-9. But the fact remained, a centerpiece of China's export arsenal had been proven toothless in live combat. Meanwhile, India's pilots and air defense crews were scoring one success after another. In the air, Pakistani J-10Cs and JF-17s struggled to challenge the Indian Air Force. Flying close to the border but cautious not to stray deep into Indian airspace, the PAF jets attempted to lock onto Indian fighters from long range. Aerial jousting ensued at distances of 50 to 100 kilometers as both sides probed each other with radar and electronic countermeasures. The PAF fired several of their much-touted PL-15 air-to-air missiles, hoping to take down an Indian jet from afar. But those hopes were quickly dashed. The PL-15s did not live up to their billing. Some missiles failed to launch properly. Others lost track of their targets in the midst of Indian jamming and evasive maneuvers, sighed Droborg. In one instance, an entire missile flew off unguided and eventually crashed into fields in Indian territory without harming anything. Indian villagers in Hoshiarpur, Punjab, were astonished to find an unexploded 3.7-meter-long PL-15 lying in the dirt, a dud from Pakistan's salvo. The Indian military gleefully displayed the recovered PL-15E missile to the media as a war trophy, a clear sign that Pakistan's cutting-edge Chinese munitions had literally fallen to the ground useless. Crucially, throughout these engagements, not a single Indian fighter jet was confirmed lost. Pakistan's media had begun blaring triumphalist claims, including stories that a J-10C had shot down multiple Indian jets, even an Ace Rafale, but they offered no evidence for these boasts. Indian officials categorically denied losing any Rafales or other jets in combat, and no wreckage or pilot was ever produced by Pakistan to back up its social media bravado. It became evident that these were propaganda narratives aimed at saving face. In reality, the Indian Air Force's careful tactics and superior tech had kept Pakistani fighters at bay. India's Rafale fighters, equipped with stealthy sensors and meteor missiles, posed a deadly threat to any PAF jet that ventured too close, something Pakistani pilots keenly understood. Forced onto the defensive, the PAF's Chinese-made fighters failed to dent the Indian offensive in any meaningful way. On the ground and in the skies, drone warfare provided yet another revelation. Pakistan sent wave after wave of Chinese-origin drones across the border. Small recon quadcopters, larger surveillance UAVs, and the heavy Wing Lung 2 combat drones, in an effort to strike Indian positions or gather intel. But the Indian Army was ready, using a combination of anti-drone jamming systems, quick reaction missiles, and even precise gunfire. Indian defenders neutralized many of the drones before they could inflict damage. Wreckage of Chinese-made drones, shot down over Punjab and Kashmir, was soon laid out for public display in Indian military briefings. The message was unmistakable. These machines were not nearly as stealthy or invincible as advertised, but rather easy prey for a modern, well-prepared air defense. Most humiliating for the Pakistan-China duo was the fate of the Wing Lung 2 UCAVs. These expensive drones, operated remotely, launched several AR-1 laser-guided missiles at Indian Army camps and radar sites. Yet not a single AR-1 found its target. India's air defenses, using Israeli-made Spider quick-reaction missiles and indigenous Akash SAMs, intercepted or neutralized every incoming missile. Some AR-1s were shot out of the sky. Others were thrown off course by electronic spoofing. In the end, Pakistan's much-hyped drone strikes were a total flop. No significant damage was done to Indian forces, despite dozens of drone sorties. The failure of the AR-1s to penetrate Indian defenses underscored the missile's shortcomings against a well-equipped adversary. For military analysts, it was yet another data point suggesting many Chinese weapons might be over-optimistic on paper and underwhelming in practice. And then there was the coup de grace, a blow that struck at the pride of China's radar technology. Early in the conflict, the Indian Air Force made a high-risk, high-reward move by targeting Pakistan's prized YLC-8E anti-stealth radar. This cutting-edge Chinese radar at Chunian Air Base was supposed to be Pakistan's eye in the sky, able to spot incoming threats at long range. But the IAF was determined to blind Pakistan's early warning system. Using either a low-flying cruise missile or a precision-guided glide bomb, the exact method remains classified, India successfully destroyed the YLC-8E radar in a pinpoint strike. One moment the radar was scanning for targets, the next it was a fireball on the ground. The loss of this flagship Chinese radar was a huge blow to the Pakistani Air Force. It not only left Pakistan's air defenses exposed, but it also sent a powerful signal. India could systematically dismantle Pakistan's Chinese-supplied defenses at will. For China, which had marketed the YLC-8E as a top-of-the-line system, its destruction was deeply embarrassing, akin to having a prized product fail spectacularly in front of prospective buyers. By the end of these exchanges, the pattern was clear. Pakistan's reliance on Chinese military hardware had not given it the edge it hoped for. In fact, those very systems were being systematically picked apart. Indian commanders noted that, while Pakistan fielded modern gear, their integration and performance left much to be desired. In contrast, India's mix of Western, Russian, and indigenous platforms, though diverse, was proving more agile and effective. The deficiencies of Chinese equipment under combat conditions were now on full display, from malfunctioning missiles to underperforming radars. As one analyst put it, Operation Sindoor became a trial by fire for Chinese weapons, and many were found wanting. After several days of brinkmanship, the guns gradually fell silent. Intense diplomatic efforts, especially from Washington and other world powers, pushed India and Pakistan to back away from full-scale war. By mid-May 2025, both sides tacitly agreed to a ceasefire, each declaring victory in their own narratives. But the outcome of Operation Sindoor was unmistakable. India had achieved its objective. The terror networks that orchestrated the Pahalgam massacre were decimated. In the process, India demonstrated newfound military prowess, while Pakistan was left reeling from the exposure of its military shortcomings. For India, Operation Sindoor was a strategic and morale-boosting success. It showcased the Indian military's ability to carry out precise, coordinated strikes deep in hostile territory while controlling escalation. Unlike past crises, India's response this time was not just diplomatic, but unabashedly military, yet calibrated to avoid civilian casualties and prevent a nuclear confrontation. This balance of firmness and restraint won New Delhi cautious praise internationally. Tactically, the operation validated India's investments in high-tech systems. The Rafale fighter jets, armed with Meteor missiles and Spectra electronic warfare suites, proved their worth in air superiority. The BrahMos cruise missiles and smart bombs struck their targets with devastating effect. And India's integrated air defense network, including Israeli radars, Russian S-400 batteries, and indigenous Akash-tier command systems, worked in unison to shield Indian forces from reprisals. In fact, India's largely indigenous air defense shield intercepted drones and missiles with exceptional success, even under heavy attack. This performance has sparked discussions about India emerging as a potential defense exporter of reliable systems. At home, Operation Sindoor sent a clear message that India's zero tolerance for terrorism was not mere rhetoric. The political leadership's boldness and the military's efficacy bolstered India's deterrence posture, not only vis-à-vis Pakistan, but also with a wary eye on China on the northern border. For Pakistan, the conflict was a sobering setback. In public, Islamabad hailed its military for giving a befitting response and claimed that Indian strikes had been largely foiled. State media churned out stories of Pakistani missiles hitting Indian targets, even concocting a tale of striking 15 Indian sites, which was quickly debunked as false, and lauded the bravery of PAF pilots. But privately, within Pakistan's military circles, there was dismay. The fact that 19 Indian missiles got through to high-value targets on Pakistani soil was alarming. How had Indian jets penetrated so far without serious losses? The realization set in that despite spending billions on modern Chinese weapons, Pakistan still struggled to defend against or deter a determined Indian attack. There were reports of quiet finger-pointing at Chinese advisors and equipment. Had Beijing sold them overrated gear? Or was it Pakistan's poor tactics at fault? Pakistani strategists also had to contend with the grim fact that their traditional edge, using terrorism under a nuclear umbrella, was eroding now that India showed willingness to retaliate militarily. With an economy in crisis and now a dented military reputation, Islamabad emerged from this conflict more isolated. And what of China, the silent partner in this drama? For Beijing, Operation Sindoor was a wake-up call and a black eye on multiple fronts. China had doubled down on arming Pakistan to counter India, supplying everything from fighter jets and warships to drones and air defenses. In this conflict, that massive investment did not translate into victory. Chinese-made weaponry performed poorly in Pakistani hands, and the whole world saw it. This was not lost on international observers or potential buyers of Chinese arms. From Southeast Asia to Africa, Militaries considering Chinese defense equipment watched with raised eyebrows as Pakistan's Chinese kit faltered. China's image as an emerging arms superpower took a hit. It didn't help that Beijing's attempt to spin the narrative by flooding social media with its own propaganda and wild claims of Indian losses fell flat when no evidence materialized. In fact, China's overt role in amplifying Pakistani disinformation only underscored its complicity and desperation to control the damage. Beijing appeared deeply concerned that if its weapons looked unreliable in South Asia's most significant conflict in years, its global arms sales could slump further. Chinese officials reportedly pressed Pakistan to hide or destroy evidence of Chinese weapons failures. But the truth was hard to conceal. Images of downed drones, dud missiles, and burning radars were already out. For China's defense industry, Operation Sindoor became a public relations fiasco, prompting urgent reviews of why their technology underperformed. Strategically, the conflict also nudged China to rethink its all-weather friendship strategy. Pakistan had long been China's proxy balancer against India, a way to keep New Delhi bogged down in the West. Yet Pakistan's inability to prevail, despite an arsenal of Chinese support, suggested that India could no longer be easily cowed. If India's military could blunt Pakistan even when armed with China's latest, Beijing might need to reassess its indirect approach or risk its proxy's defeat and its own regional influence in a future showdown. Additionally, China faces an uncomfortable prospect. Pakistan's instability and bruised military might actually hinder Chinese projects like CPEC, the economic corridor through Pakistan that China stakes much on. A weakened, embarrassed Pakistan is a less useful tool for China's ambitions and potentially a greater liability. All this adds new complexity to the already fraught India-China-Pakistan strategic triangle. Finally, the global arms market is taking notes. The poor showing of Chinese defense gear under real combat conditions will likely make other countries think twice about investing in Chinese military hardware. The perceived reliability gap between Western Russian systems and Chinese ones may have widened post-Sindoor. Conversely, India's success with its mix of Western and homegrown tech could boost interest in Indian defense innovations down the line.